playing that barbaric role, doing all the sword fighting, and it was a very physical film.
To crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and to hear the lamentation of their women.
For more than 4 decades, Conan the Barbarian has been seen as the moment Arnold Schwarzenegger officially became a movie star, an unstoppable warrior who seemed born for the role. But what most fans never realized is that the real story happened off-camera, in a production far more extreme than anything shown on screen. Only recently has Arnold begun revealing what actually went on during filming, and the details are nothing like the polished legend people assumed. His new reflections expose a level of risk, pain, and behind-the-scenes chaos that completely reframes how the film was made. And what he finally admitted might change how you see Conan forever.
That frightens you. You're afraid of magic. And you will have to deal with it.
The vulture scene no one talks about. Let's start with something that sounds almost unbelievable, even for an actor known for pushing his limits. Arnold Schwarzenegger bit into a real, dead vulture while filming Conan the Barbarian. Not a rubber replica, not a prosthetic made in a workshop. An actual vulture that had been prepared by the props department for the scene. He talked about it casually in his 2023 book, Be Useful: 7 Tools for Life. The way he described it made it seem like just another odd day at work, but the details were rough. Every time he bit the bird, the crew had him rinse his mouth with alcohol. And this wasn't a one-and-done situation. They filmed several takes. That meant several bites, several rounds of rinsing, and several moments where Arnold had to try not to think too hard about what the bird might have been carrying before it ended up on set. The scene wasn't treated as a big stunt either. It was simply part of the job. Director John Milius was known for wanting things to feel as real as possible, and that meant repeating the moment until he was satisfied. Arnold had no choice but to go along with it, even if the idea of putting his mouth on a scavenger bird wasn't exactly something an actor dreams about when signing a contract. What's striking is how normal this seemed in the early 1980s. Film sets were rougher, safety protocols were looser, and directors had far more freedom to demand whatever they believed would make a scene look authentic. If a filmmaker tried something similar today, production would shut down instantly. Between animal welfare rules, health regulations, and simple liability concerns, no studio would even consider letting an actor bite into a dead bird, even for realism. Arnold acknowledged that much in his book, noting that times have changed, and for good reason. But what makes the revelation more interesting is how Arnold handled it back then. He didn't complain publicly. He didn't talk about it in interviews for attention. He didn't use it to prove how tough he was. For decades, he kept the story to himself. To him, experiences like that weren't tragedies or triumphs. They were part of proving he belonged in the industry. He knew he had to earn respect in Hollywood, especially with people dismissing him as just a bodybuilder when he first arrived. So he treated situations like the vulture scene as part of the learning curve. And strangely enough, the vulture wasn't even the most intense part of making Conan the Barbarian. It was just one small example of how physically demanding the shoot was. Arnold has often said the whole production felt like he'd enrolled in a different kind of school, a place where the lessons were all about how far you could push yourself physically, how many bruises you could keep working through, and how committed you were willing to be. Looking back, he doesn't describe any of it with bitterness. He talks about it plainly and even with a bit of appreciation. Those grueling moments shaped him. They helped him understand what it meant to carry an action film. They taught him discipline in a completely new way, beyond bodybuilding or competition. And if you watch Conan the Barbarian today, the results are obvious. That realism audiences still talk about didn't come from special effects or camera tricks. It came from actors doing real physical work. The sweat wasn't sprayed on, the exhaustion wasn't faked, and the intensity wasn't something added in post-production. The movie feels different from other fantasy films of the era because it was made under conditions that demanded a different level of physical and mental grit. What's even more surprising is that the vulture scene is usually overshadowed by the rest of Arnold's stories from the production. But once you know about it, it changes how you watch the film. That moment, brief as it is, captures the entire spirit of how Conan was made. 18 months of transformation. Before Arnold ever bit that vulture, before he arrived on the Spanish locations where Conan the Barbarian would be filmed, he went through one of the most demanding preparation periods any actor had faced at that time. He dedicated 18 full months, an entire year and a half, to reshaping himself into Conan, not just physically, but mentally and technically. It was a level of preparation that most people didn't realize happened behind the scenes, especially because Arnold had already been Mr. Olympia 7 times. Fans assumed he simply showed up on set with the body he'd built through bodybuilding. But the truth was far more complicated. Arnold quickly learned that the body of a competitive bodybuilder wasn't the body John Milius wanted for Conan. The two disciplines, bodybuilding and functional warrior training, just didn't overlap the way people imagined. His bodybuilding physique was designed to look perfect on a stage, symmetrical, polished, defined, and massive. But a warrior's body needed to move differently. It needed to sprint, climb, leap, roll, and handle heavy weapons with ease. It required versatility, not just size. Working with his longtime friend Franco Columbu, he intentionally dropped around 30 pounds. Losing that much weight wasn't simply about cutting calories or leaning out. It was about rebuilding his physical abilities from the ground up. Arnold had spent years training for muscle growth, performing controlled movements meant to isolate muscles. For Conan, he had to train his body to work as a single unit, fast, coordinated, and explosive. Cardio, endurance drills, trail running, swimming, and footwork all became part of his daily routine. He trained for power and mobility, not just aesthetics. Then came the specialized skill training. Arnold had to become a capable horseman, and not in the leisurely sense. He was expected to ride at full speed, handle abrupt turns, stay balanced while wielding weapons, and know how to fall without getting seriously injured. And because no stuntman on earth matched his physique, he had no safety net. Every fall, every crash, every risky maneuver, he had to do it himself. There was no cut to the double available. Sword training became another major part of his regimen. For 3 months straight, he practiced with broadswords that weighed around 11 pounds each, far heavier than typical film props, and cost roughly $10,000 apiece. His instructor, martial arts expert Kiyoshi Yamazaki, taught him not just the choreography, but how to move as though he'd been trained since childhood. Arnold practiced until his body absorbed the movements without thought, until the swords felt like extensions of him rather than props. He also learned rope climbing, rock climbing, how to fall from significant heights, how to roll out of impacts, and how to move across uneven terrain with speed. None of these skills were things he had practiced as a bodybuilder, so the learning curve was steep, but Arnold embraced it. In his book, he said this training felt like another school, one that prepared him for the life of an action star just as bodybuilding had prepared him for competition. John Milius documented the training sessions as if they were part of the production itself. For Milius, Conan needed to be believable. For Arnold, the training became personal proof that he could become more than the stereotype Hollywood had placed on him. One detail that often surprises fans is that, in the middle of preparing for Conan, Arnold decided to enter the 1980 Mr. Olympia competition, and he won. That means he was simultaneously preparing for one of the most iconic movies of the decade and training to reclaim a bodybuilding title, something that required extraordinary physical and mental discipline. Winning his 7th Olympia wasn't a detour for him. It was part of the same mindset that drove his Conan preparation. What this period really revealed was Arnold's resolve. Hollywood doubted him constantly. The accent, the muscles, the unusual background. Many people thought he was a novelty act who wouldn't last. But Arnold knew that if he poured everything he had into Conan, there would be no debate. Nobody else could do what he was training himself to do. That determination shaped the entire production, and it paid off. One of the reasons Conan the Barbarian stands apart from other fantasy films of the era is because so much of what you see on screen is real. Arnold was genuinely performing with heavy equipment. He was genuinely sprinting, climbing, falling, tumbling, and fighting. The exhaustion, the effort, the strain, they weren't added in later. They were captured exactly as they happened. That authenticity is a major reason the film has held up so well. There's a physicality to it that you don't get from special effects or digital enhancements. When Arnold later talked about what most fans never realized, he emphasized the training just as much as the more shocking behind-the-scenes stories. To him, it wasn't about showing off. It was about helping people understand that his success didn't come from luck or image. It came from hard work, discipline, and a willingness to do what others would turn down. And as intense as those 18 months were, they were only the beginning. When the cameras started rolling. If the training was intense, the actual filming made those 18 months look like a vacation. Arnold's revelations about what happened once cameras started rolling paint a picture of a production that pushed every boundary of safety and sanity, even for the early 1980s. Right at the start of filming, Arnold tore a deep gash across his back that required around 40 stitches. It happened so early in production that it almost felt like a warning about what the rest of the shoot would be like. Most people would have been forced to sit out for days, maybe weeks. Arnold just kept going, partly because the film depended on him, and partly because he had convinced himself that enduring pain was part of earning his place in Hollywood. There was no easing into the work. It was intense from the first day. This early injury set the tone for everything that followed. John Milius, the film's director, had a reputation for being demanding in a way that bordered on extreme. Arnold has described the tasks he was given as all kinds of terrible. But the remarkable thing is that he did them anyway. Scene after scene required physical punishment. In one sequence, Arnold crawled across jagged rocks for take after take until his forearms were scraped open. The blood the audience sees in some shots is his real blood, not makeup. Nobody paused filming to patch him up because Milius wanted the scene to feel rough and unfiltered. Then there were the dogs. Arnold had to sprint away from a pack of real unrestrained dogs during a chase scene. They weren't specially trained Hollywood animals meant to stay within safe limits. They were unpredictable, and during one take, they actually caught him. They dragged him into a thorn bush before the crew could intervene. Arnold walked away from that moment scratched, shaken, and painfully aware that this production wasn't interested in taking shortcuts. A big reason for all of this, something Arnold only started explaining openly in recent years, was the lack of stunt doubles. Nobody had a physique remotely close to his, which meant there was no one to fill in for the dangerous shots. Everything fell on him. Every leap, every fall, every sword fight, every animal interaction. He wasn't a trained stunt performer, yet he had to do the job of one because the film literally had no alternative. The physical risks multiplied simply because he was the only man who looked like Conan. Milius's directing style intensified all of this. He wanted authenticity above all else. If Conan needed to struggle, Milius wanted to capture a real struggle. If Conan needed to look exhausted, Milius preferred to film Arnold while he was genuinely exhausted. The idea of faking anything didn't interest him. It created a situation where Arnold's physical suffering became part of the visual realism of the movie. Arnold later described how repetitive filming magnified the danger. In movies, nothing is done once. A simple action can be repeated 10, 20, or 30 times from slightly different angles. So if he had to fall repeatedly. If he had to swing a sword in a wide arc while sprinting, he had to do it until the director was satisfied. By the end of each day, he wasn't just tired. He was worn down in ways that even the most intense bodybuilding sessions couldn't prepare him for. Filming in Spain added to the challenge. The production used rugged landscapes in Almeria, a region known for its heat, rocky hills, and isolated terrain. The beauty of the location helped define the visual tone of the movie, but it also meant the cast and crew were working in rough conditions. The production built 49 different sets across the region, and Arnold had to perform difficult stunts at nearly all of them. There were days with intense heat, days spent climbing unstable surfaces, and days when help wasn't immediately available when something went wrong, simply because of how remote the location was. Arnold also had to learn to work with multiple large animals. Riding horses was already difficult, but Conan also required him to ride camels and even elephants. Each animal required a different technique, a different balance, and a different awareness of how to manage sudden movements. Falling off a horse can seriously injure you. Falling off an elephant can do far worse. Yet Arnold had to make each ride look natural and confident, all while carrying weapons and maintaining the physical presence of a warrior. What makes Arnold's later reflections so striking is how he talks about these experiences with a calm acceptance. He didn't share these details in the 80s to build hype. He didn't use them to cultivate a tougher persona in the 90s. He waited decades. When he finally revealed what went on behind the scenes, his goal wasn't to shock anyone. It was to explain the level of commitment the role demanded, the kind of commitment that shaped his entire approach to action movies afterward. And as grueling as the shoot was, there was still one major element of the production that fans rarely hear about. The man behind the camera who made all of this possible and complicated. The director at the center of it all. Here's something most people don't know. Arnold Schwarzenegger didn't want John Milius to direct Conan the Barbarian. In fact, Arnold had already chosen someone else entirely, and that early choice reveals a fascinating alternate version of the film that almost existed. Arnold's first pick was Ralph Bakshi, the animator and filmmaker behind the 1978 The Lord of the Rings animated film and the fantasy adventure Fire and Ice. Arnold took him to lunch to personally ask him to direct Conan. Bakshi said yes, but only if Arnold agreed to one major change that would have completely altered the direction of the character Bakshi wanted Arnold to slim down. He didn't want the hulking, muscle-packed bodybuilder look. He wanted a leaner, less imposing version of Conan for Arnold. That was a deal-breaker. His physique was the very reason producers saw him as the living embodiment of Conan. He had spent years building the body that matched the art on the paperback covers. Being asked to shrink down for the role didn't make sense to him at all. After that lunch, Arnold said Bakshi never contacted him again. Just like that, the partnership ended before it even started. And because of that single disagreement, John Milius came into the picture. And he ended up shaping Conan in a way Bakshi never would have. Milius had a completely different vision. Where Bakshi leaned toward stylized fantasy, Milius wanted something rough and grounded. He aimed for a world that felt ancient, unstable, and brutal. No cartoon energy, no polished, sanitized look. He wanted viewers to feel the dirt, the sweat, the weight of every sword, the cost of every battle. His philosophy of filmmaking leaned heavily on realism and physicality, which explains a lot about the challenges Arnold later revealed. Milius also co-wrote the screenplay with Oliver Stone, another filmmaker who leaned hard into realism and intensity. Together, they built a version of Conan that wasn't just about adventure. It was about survival, loss, power, and what shapes a warrior. Concepts like the Riddle of Steel came from Milius and carried the deeper, mythic tone he loved exploring. That commitment to realism is why Milius pushed Arnold so hard. When Arnold's arms bled from crawling across rocks, Milius kept the cameras rolling. When the trained dogs got a little too enthusiastic and dragged Arnold into thorns, Milius didn't call cut right away. When Arnold had to bite into the dead vulture, Milius wanted more than one take. For him, these moments weren't extreme. They were essential. They created the gritty texture he believed the film needed. Arnold has been honest about how tough this was, but he also points out what Milius gave him in return. Milius didn't treat him like a gimmick or a stunt performer. He treated him like someone capable of carrying a major film. He surrounded Arnold with actors like James Earl Jones and Max von Sydow, performers known for their depth and gravitas. Arnold has said that Jones, in particular, was generous with advice and guidance, helping him learn how to approach scenes and deliver lines with more control. Those small lessons added up quickly. Milius expected Arnold to rise to the level of everyone around him, not because he was cruel, but because he genuinely believed Arnold belonged in the room with serious actors. That belief shaped Arnold's confidence. It also shaped how audiences began to see him. Looking back now, Arnold openly acknowledges that Milius made Conan into more than just a sword and sorcery adventure. The tone, the world-building, the philosophy, the intensity, all of it reflected Milius's influence. Without him, the film would not have been the same. And without that version of the film, Arnold's career likely would have looked completely different. That brings everything back to the lunch with Bakshi. If Arnold had agreed to slim down, if Bakshi had taken over, if the movie had leaned toward a different style, Arnold might have blended into the crowd of actors trying to break into Hollywood during that time. Instead, Conan became the launchpad for the iconic physical presence he carried into The Terminator, Predator, Commando, Total Recall, and so many others. Milius didn't just direct the movie. He helped define the identity Arnold carried through the rest of his career. And Arnold's more recent comments show a kind of acceptance. He respects what Milius demanded from him, even if the process was harsh. He understands the cost of that realism, and he understands why Milius insisted on it. It's the reason the film still stands out today. It feels physical because it was physical. It feels dangerous because it was dangerous. And that brings us to something even more surprising. What Arnold was actually paid to endure everything he endured. What the role really cost him. Arnold Schwarzenegger was paid $250,000 for Conan the Barbarian. In today's terms, that's roughly $800,000. Good money for a breakout role, but nowhere near the massive salaries he'd earn later in his career. And when you look at what Arnold has finally revealed about making Conan, the paycheck starts to feel small compared to what the role demanded of him physically, mentally, and professionally. The physical cost alone was staggering. We've already talked about the 40 stitches in his back, the bleeding forearms, the wild dogs, and the thorn bushes. But there were more injuries that Arnold never mentioned publicly until much later. One of the worst happened when he was thrown off a horse and badly injured his knee. According to Arnold, the pain made it hard to walk, let alone run or fight on camera. Yet, he finished filming. He didn't ask for a break, and he didn't slow down production. He pushed through the pain, because in his mind, quitting wasn't an option. Arnold was 34 when Conan came out. That's relatively late for someone trying to break into Hollywood as an action lead. He'd already spent the late 1970s bouncing between small roles, often in films that didn't showcase him well at all. Conan was the turning point. It was the moment that either would launch him or send him back to bodybuilding for good. He knew he didn't have endless chances to prove himself. The contract he signed also came with strict limitations. The producers put him on retainer, but prevented him from starring in any other sword and sorcery projects. At the time, fantasy films were becoming popular, and those restrictions cut off potential opportunities. Arnold was essentially locked into Conan before anyone knew if the franchise would succeed. If the movie underperformed, his career would have stalled instantly. Everything he endured was tied to a project that carried a very real risk of failure. There was also the emotional and psychological strain. Arnold has been open about feeling out of his depth, working alongside actors like James Earl Jones and Max von Sydow. These were accomplished, dramatic performers with deep training and decades of experience. Arnold admired them, but he also felt the pressure of needing to keep up. He wasn't just building muscle anymore, he was building credibility. And he knew he was being judged by critics, audiences, and the industry at every moment. When the film came out, critics didn't go easy on him. Variety dismissed his performance. The Golden Raspberry Awards nominated him for Worst Actor. A lot of reviewers treated him like a novelty act. They praised the sets and score, but singled him out as the weak link. After everything he'd endured physically, that kind of criticism could have crushed him. Instead, Arnold has said those reactions made him more determined. He didn't deny the critiques. He didn't pretend they didn't sting. He used them to push himself. He studied acting more seriously, worked harder on his craft, and made choices that allowed his presence and style to fit the roles he took. When he played the Terminator 2 years later, he wasn't trying to hide his stiffness or accent. He leaned into them. What had been weaknesses in Conan suddenly became strengths. There was also a cultural cost. Hollywood didn't take bodybuilders seriously. Many directors saw Arnold as someone who could lift a sword but not carry a scene. His accent made him a target for jokes long before it became iconic. And his body, while impressive, made it hard for casting directors to imagine him in any role that wasn't built entirely around physicality. Conan didn't fix all of that, but it cracked the door open. What Arnold wants people to understand now is that all these challenges weren't just obstacles, they were part of a larger transformation. The pain, the criticism, the self-doubt, they hardened him, sharpened him, and taught him what being an action star actually required. Conan didn't just introduce him to the world. It forged him. The movie's box office success helped. Conan the Barbarian made $68.9 million on a $20 million budget. It beat out films that later became classics, including Blade Runner, The Road Warrior, and John Carpenter's The Thing. On cable and home video, it exploded even further. Audiences connected with something raw and physical that most other productions couldn't match. Arnold has been clear about how much this meant to him. He's called Conan God's gift to my career. Without it, he has said, he might have returned to bodybuilding or continued investing in real estate. But instead, studios finally saw him as a bankable lead. Directors who once doubted him began offering him starring roles. Still, the cost stayed with him. He has mentioned that even decades later, certain memories from the shoot come back instantly. The dogs, the falls, the bleeding arms, the vulture. They weren't just stories, they were reminders of the line he crossed between being a hopeful newcomer and becoming someone Hollywood couldn't ignore. And those experiences help explain something else. Why Arnold waited so long to reveal the full truth. So why did Arnold Schwarzenegger wait more than 40 years to reveal these details about Conan the Barbarian? Why share them now in his book and recent interviews, instead of back then or during the height of his action movie career? Arnold has suggested that timing plays a major role in how and when you tell your story. In the 1980s and 1990s, when he was building his image as the world's biggest action star, talking about injuries or brutal working conditions would have clashed with what audiences expected from him. His entire on-screen appeal was built on toughness. People loved him because he looked unstoppable. If he had admitted he was hurt, exhausted, or pushed too far, it might have chipped away at the larger-than-life persona he was creating. There's also the matter of perspective. When you're younger and constantly working, you don't have the distance to step back and evaluate the experiences you're going through. He was filming non-stop, promoting movies, and preparing for whatever came next. Reflection wasn't a priority then. Only later, after decades of work, can someone look back and make sense of what all those experiences added up to. Now, in his mid-70s, Arnold has lived several different lives. Bodybuilding champion, box office star, governor, and now author. He doesn't need to protect a career trajectory or maintain a specific public image. He has freedom to speak openly in a way he didn't have before. In his book, Be Useful, 7 Tools for Life, he shares these Conan stories as practical lessons rather than dramatic confessions. His goal isn't to shock anyone or earn sympathy. It's to show how intense commitment looks in real life. By finally revealing the harsh realities behind Conan, he's offering younger generations an example of what it means to fully invest in something. There's also a sense of wanting to correct assumptions. For decades, some people wrote off Arnold's success as luck or physical appearance by explaining what actually happened on that set. He's showing that his rise wasn't effortless. It required sacrifice, risk, and enduring things most people would have refused. The vulture bite, the stitches, the dogs, the exhaustion. All of it fills in the missing pieces of a story that fans only knew on the surface. And hearing it now, with the full context, changes the way the entire film and Arnold's early career looks. Now, we're curious. What you think? Did any of these revelations change the way you see Conan? Which part surprised you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your take. Be sure to like, subscribe to our channel, and check out the next video that pops up on your screen. You never know what next you'll discover.